Scenes of destruction and defiance in the streets of Beijing as enraged Chinese take on an army divided against itself. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from Los Angeles. Good evening. A huge force of soldiers and tanks took up positions in Beijing today. The specter of an all-out civil war hovered over the Chinese capital. More civilians died as tanks fired at unarmed civilians in the streets. Some people tried to fight tanks with their hands. But the occupying army in the capital now seems to be preparing for a possible assault by other elements of the military, perhaps an attempt at a military coup. The Communist Party hardliners who dominate the government of China have had nothing to say. None has appeared in public for several days. John Sheehan begins our coverage from Beijing.
Dan, over the last several hours, there has been the continual sound of gunfire here as Beijing and possibly the country sink deeper into chaos. China's 27th Army holds Tiananmen Square with a force of 160 tanks, plus infantry and other armor. It was principally the 27th that slaughtered unarmed peaceful protesters. But there are clear signs that some elements in China's army are outraged by the atrocity. The 27th has moved to defensive positions, clearly expecting an assault by other troops, not necessarily in hopes of defeating the superior arms of the killers of Tiananmen, perhaps only to delay or prevent an attack on the defenseless tens of thousands of students barricaded in their campuses. The government announced that the Tiananmen massacre was only the initial victory. The punishment of the pro-democracy movement is to continue.
It's a disaster. It's a tragedy.
Some of the hundreds of American students in Beijing, meantime, began packing up today. Mara Tifi of Minneapolis said she is leaving, but hopes to return. Columns of tanks occasionally rove out of the city center, often firing wildly at civilians. Only the lucky survive.
Did the bullet go all the way through your body?
Yes, through my body and go out from my arm.
Despite the continuing killing, civilians resist with sticks and stones and raw courage and rage. Some soldiers have been murdered, equipment destroyed. And there are now credible reports of soldiers who have set their own vehicles on fire and withdrawn in disgust at making war on their own people. Actually defeating the powerful army positioned around the city center and the Communist Party headquarters would require a concerted effort by armies from several provinces. Even then, there is no guarantee it would succeed. Dan, the appalling crackdown on the students has produced an even bigger and more widespread rebellion and has brought China to the brink of civil war. Dan?
Chuck Sheehan in Beijing, thanks. No one knows how many people have died in the crackdown. We may never know. Our own CBS News review of hospital figures indicates that at least 300 have died. The figure may be as high as 3,000 or more. Many were civilians who went into the street unarmed to challenge the military and were mowed down by machine gun fire or run over by tanks. But amazingly, people were still defying the army today. Richard Roth has one story.
It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace, which, as it happened, was already occupied. He walked to the middle and stood there. The man was alone. The tank was not. It wasn't just a single tank he stopped. There were 18 tanks and armored carriers in this convoy, and while he talked to the crew and ignored the gunfire, he stopped all of them. One man alone, of course, can't stop an army. Except for a moment, that's exactly what happened here. For 3 minutes in the middle of the day, an army was stopped by a man who stood still. A man who'd made up his mind, it seems, though why we just don't know. But when bystanders rushed in to save this stubborn soul, it wasn't easily done. He was pushed away at last, faceless in the crowd. Safe, we think, but in a city verging on calamity. What moves a man to just stand still? Is it courage or outrage or madness? We can't tell what was on his mind, and we can't forget what he did. Richard Roth, CBS News, Beijing.
President Bush today issued his toughest statement on China so far, saying its leaders were, and I quote now, brutally suppressing a peaceful movement. President Bush ordered limited sanctions, but says he does not want to break relations. Wyatt Andrews has that part of the story.
Abandoning his early wait-and-see approach, the president today sent a get-tough message to the Chinese military. He suspended all U.S. military sales to China, declaring the United States cannot do business as usual.
And I think it's important that the Army know that we want to see restraint, and this is the best way to signal that.
The order puts in limbo $686 million in military sales to China, effectively halting American assistance to the Chinese F-8 fighter program and stopping U.S. aid to 2 ammunition factories. Top-level military visits are also suspended. In addition, Mr. Bush offered Red Cross help for those injured in the violence, ordered a review of U.S. relations with China, and said the United States would sympathetically view requests from Chinese students who want to extend their visits in the United States. Significantly, the president did not suspend any other trade with China or cut off diplomatic relations with Beijing.
This would be a bad time for the United States to withdraw and pull back and leave them to the devices of a leadership that might decide to crack down further.
A group of 4 Chinese students, hastily invited to the White House, hailed the president's new plan.
A measured response, I think, may help the things in China move toward a good direction.
Despite earlier complaints that the president moved too slowly, this latest plan of action won immediate support.
I think the actions he's taken are prudent, and I agree. I think the United States ambassador should remain there.
We have to condemn what has been happening, but we have to do it in such a way that we do not foreclose the possibility of a closer relationship again.
Yet Mr. Bush will still face pressure to do even more.
I am going to seek contingency legislation to suspend trade, investment, financial and other ties to this brutal communist government.
That the Chinese military appears divided against itself is not seen as a bad sign here at the White House. President Bush, who is reading the tea leaves and watching television just like everyone else, says a splintered military proves a high level of support for the students and that the idea of democracy has taken root in China for good. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
The State Department has set up a special phone line for information on American citizens in China. The phone number to call is area code 202-647-0562. 202-647-0562. The governments of Cuba and Vietnam backed the Chinese government's crackdown and massacre today. The rest of the world reacted with outrage and grief. Bruce Morton reports.
The Chinese government ordered the Chinese army to kill Chinese civilians. The troops fired. People died. Cameras worked. The whole world was watching. Today, all over the world, people protested and raged and cried. In Bonn, they burned an army uniform. This woman works for the Chinese embassy in Bonn, but she was one who cried. Massacre, the banners read. The army used force. The students used what they had, rocks sometimes swords. In Moscow, a quiet protest. They sang too. In English, one line goes, "A brave new world's in birth." Not today. In Beijing, they cried for the dead. In Roanoke, Virginia, a man cried out for a missing brother. One of the largest protests was in Hong Kong, which is to become part of China, this new China, in 1997. Truck drivers sat down, refused to cross the Hong Kong-China border. In Beijing, soldiers died too. A crowd killed this one.
I will go back and fight with...
Some Chinese students, like this one at UCLA, wanted to go home and fight. Others marched here.
We do not recognize anymore the government of China anymore.
In Beijing, rubble and protest. In Washington, D.C., marchers and a defaced flag and protest.
People believe that at least they are human beings at the beginning, and now people find out that they are no longer human beings.
Outside the United Nations, which cannot intervene in China's internal killings, chants and marchers. Here and everywhere, tears and anger, grief and rage, all mingled. The whole world was watching. It will never see China quite the same way. again. Bruce Morton, CBS News, New York.
And still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News. Political turmoil in both Poland and Iran. Correspondent Barry Peterson on grief and outrage over the Soviet train disaster. And Susan Spencer on what happens to hospitals when AIDS cases double.
Breathe normally. I like to listen to you.
U.S. Sprint proudly announces fiber optic 800 services for businesses large and small. No matter what you're selling by phone, your customers will sound closer and your calls will cost less. Get America's only nationwide 100% fiber optic 800 service for your business. Call Sprint now and talk with the best.
We're here to gently remind you that you can depend on your mom.
Phillips Milk of Magnesia, the laxative for dependable overnight relief.
It helps your body work naturally. So it's gentle.
Nobody treats you better than Mom.
Mom knows best. Leave it to Mom.
I used pressure-treated lumber and still have expensive water damage. Why?
Even treated wood needs Thompson's Water Seal. It penetrates to protect wood, brick, and concrete from water damage. Thompson's, the first name in lasting protection.
April in Paris. He said he'd give me Paris wrapped up in ribbons. But he was young and poor. So we settled for a small cafe and coffee. Coffee so rich, I thought I'd never taste its like again.
Discover the pleasure of rich French roast, new from Maxwell House. Rich French roast coffee. We can't give you France, but we'll give you the flavor.
Poland's first freely contested election since World War II turned out to be no contest. Solidarity claimed today it won almost every seat it ran for in Parliament. Bert Quint reports the danger now is backlash from the losing old-line communists.
Poland's Communist Party admitted defeat today as Solidarity appeared to be heading for a landslide in Poland's freest election in 4 decades. The votes are still being counted, but partial returns indicate the Communist Party has been humiliated, and the opposition will have a much stronger voice in Parliament than either side expected when they agreed to move toward democracy gradually. This top Politburo member complained, Solidarity will have the power to paralyze the political system. The Solidarity spokesman called the results a vote of confidence for the union and reform.
This is sort of a reminder that there is no return to the old bad practices.
The opposition ran for all seats in a newly created Senate, and Solidarity claims that so far its candidates are winning them all. The union's candidates also seem to be winning most of the limited number of seats they were allowed to contest in the old Chamber of Parliament. With many voters striking out the names of any communists they could find, some key party members, including the Prime Minister, may not make it. The danger in this orgy of anti-communism is that some of the communist co-architects of reform could be among the losers, and that would strengthen the hand of party hardliners. Today, Lech Wałęsa urged his Solidarity followers to show restraint. A new society, he said, must be created not by struggle, but by consensus. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
New ethnic violence in the Soviet Union, this time in the Republic of Uzbek. Thousands of Soviet troops have been sent in, and President Gorbachev appealed for calm. 2 people are reported dead, more than 70 hurt, and many homes burned down. A Soviet journalist said today that at least 800 people died in what may turn out to be the world's worst rail disaster. It happened over the weekend when a natural gas pipeline next to railroad tracks exploded just as 2 crowded trains were passing. More from our Moscow correspondent Barry Peterson on this wreck on the rails.
A stunned nation searched for answers today. How did it happen and why? A pipeline was leaking for hours, but instead of investigating a drop in pressure, technicians turned pumps up higher to compensate, forcing even more gas out. A spark set off a blast equal to 10,000 tons of TNT, a blazing killing field. Many of the dead and injured were children on their way to summer camp. Some were flown to Moscow tonight, more than 700 miles away. Flags across the nation were at half-staff, including those at the Kremlin. Inside, Mikhail Gorbachev canceled a meeting of the new Congress, but not before he led the nation's soul-searching. Why did it happen? Again, he said over nationwide television, again, there is incompetence, mismanagement, disgrace. To many Soviets, the accident has come to symbolize all the worst of the Soviet system. Workers who didn't care or didn't know how to do their jobs. Children hurt or dead because of it. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
Honda lawnmower. It was first with a blade brake clutch that stops the blade without stopping the engine. First with a maintenance-free automotive-type shaft drive. And first with an easy-starting overhead valve engine. It's no wonder this is the first lawnmower good enough to be a Honda.
All brand, part of your health kick? Yeah, helps ensure I get enough fiber.
Each morning, Tracy Reed takes out some fiber insurance with Kellogg's All Brand, concentrated fiber that can help her meet the National Cancer Institute's guidelines for a high-fiber, low-fat diet. A diet some studies suggest may reduce the risks of certain forms of cancer.
Oh, you're crazy to worry about stuff like that.
I'd be crazy not to.
Kellogg's All Brand. Make it your daily fiber policy.
Ever try this coffee?
Oh, no. I use a special blend, brewed fresh.
So do we. But then we freeze dry to lock in superior flavor and aroma until you release it.
Perfect. Who are you?
We're Taster's Choice.
Just this much Cortaid heals more kinds of itches and rashes than all of these. Because Cortaid has a clinically proven healing medicine they don't have. That's why Cortaid is the Itch Aid.
Grief turned into mass hysteria today as Iranians gathered to view the body of Ayatollah Khomeini. At least 8 people died in the crush. Paying his personal respects was the new interim leader, President Ali Khamenei. Tom Fenton is in Tehran.
Millions of mourners came today to the vast prayer field on the outskirts of Tehran, where Ayatollah Khomeini lies in state. The voice that launched an Islamic revolution is now stilled. But Khomeini's last will, which was read today, hurled condemnation from beyond the grave at most of the moderate leaders of the Arab world. The shrouded figure encased in glass under the blazing sun was the focus of waves of overpowering emotion. Fire hoses cooled down the crowd, but not its grief. Mourners worked themselves into a fever of religious ecstasy. They came in a never-ending flow throughout the day. Busloads of the Ayatollah's Revolutionary Guards waving banners careened through the streets. Vast crowds of ordinary people came on foot. Entire families came with women carrying small children.
This is a very sad day for everybody. Very sad, as you see.
The grief here is real and deep. The ordinary people of Iran, above all the poor, were Khomeini's constituency. Now that he is gone, there is no one who can really replace him.
Even though a successor has been named, some observers feel a power struggle is inevitable as the Islamic Republic faces the future without its founder. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Tehran.
Monsoon rains in Sri Lanka have brought that island country's worst flooding in 40 years. Floods and mudslides following 3 days of torrential rainfall have killed at least 250 people, and the toll is expected to rise. Thousands of homes in Sri Lanka have been destroyed and more than 100,000 people are without shelter.
Today's Monday, coming off a rough weekend. Saturday, I painted the den and came up aching, so I took aspirin. Sunday, I cleaned the attic. More aches, more aspirin.
If you take aspirin more than once a week, make your aspirin Tri-Buffered Bufferin. It's 100% aspirin, plus 3 buffers that help protect against stomach upset plain aspirin can cause.
I sure needed it this weekend.
Tri-Buffered Bufferin, in tablets and caplets. If you take aspirin more than once a week.
If you thought you had to give up comfort to get a close shave, Norelco says, think again. Their revolutionary shaving system shaves skin close in a way that's incredibly comfortable. As the hair enters the chamber, the patented lift and cut system lifts each hair and holds it a split second before a blade cuts it, so it's possible to shave skin close without the blades even touching the skin. The lift and cut shaving system from Norelco. We made close comfortable.
When Ocean Spray adds ripe red raspberries to tangy cranberries, something cool and refreshing happens to chicken. New Cran Fruit brand sauces add a cool, refreshing
thing
to everything.
Quaker State engines don't know when to quit.
Mine's pushing 250,000 miles.
Quaker State exceeds every single car maker's U.S. requirements for maximum engine protection.
The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.
A big civil rights decision in the U.S. Supreme Court today. The 5-4 ruling will make it more difficult for minority workers to prove racial bias in employment and make it easier for employers to defend themselves. Native American and other minority workers in Alaskan salmon canneries had charged that only whites were hired and promoted for the more skilled jobs. Dissenting Justice Harry Blackmun called this Supreme Court ruling a major step backward for civil rights. The brush fire sweep of AIDS through New York's drug users, minorities, and the poor may be important for other cities and other nations. That was the projection today at the 5th Annual International AIDS Conference in Montreal. CBS News medical correspondent Susan Spencer reports.
AIDS activists again heckled during this morning's session, one shouting in frustration what many doctors here already know.
You get sick in New York, you can't get into a hospital.
With new projections that the number of AIDS cases will double in the next 2 years, there is near panic among experts who already see hospitals pushed to the limit. The problem especially acute in California and New York.
There is going to come a critical point, and it's arriving at that now, where there will not be an available bed in the city of New York, and you will have people waiting online to get into those beds.
Stephen is a writer and an AIDS patient in the hospital for the first time.
I've seen people in hospitals be sent out onto the street saying everything's fine, and it wasn't.
What worries this conference is that what's happening in New York and California probably is a sign of things to come. Ironically, the crisis stems in part from medical progress. Patients today live much longer than they once did. But the treatments that keep them alive are expensive, and many have no insurance. Hospitals pick up the tab.
We are going to have more problems in the years ahead as patients survive longer and come into the hospital over and over and over again.
Also threatening the system, the growing number of AIDS cases among drug users in poor health to begin with.
Up until now, we've enjoyed a great amount of community support. I don't know if we're going to have the same community support with the intravenous drug users.
There will be much searching here for alternatives to hospitals, hospices, home and long-term care, anything to guarantee that as AIDS increases, compassion will not take a back seat to the bottom line. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Montreal.
Quote, "He is the last of the people we can depend on." So said an elderly mourner in Tallahassee's First Baptist Church, where services were held today for Representative Claude Pepper. The 88-year-old Pepper died of cancer last week. He was remembered as an advocate for the elderly and those in need. And after the hymns and the lowered flag and the farewell of taps, Claude Pepper was praised as a leader like no other we will see in our time. Major banks, led by New York-based Citibank, today sliced their prime lending rate half a point down to 11%. Analysts said the move was expected because last week's unemployment report indicated that the economy is slowing. Today's cut is the first drop in the prime rate, which is used as a benchmark for many loans since February 1988.
When it's morning in New Orleans, coffee lovers head for Brennan's Restaurant for that all-important first cup of the day. This morning, we're secretly switching their fresh brewed coffee with dark, sparkling Folgers crystals. Can these people tell the difference?
He's a monster before he has coffee in the morning.
I'd like to be around while this was being brewed.
The smell would wake me up in the morning. This big cup.
It's Folgers crystals.
Oh, really?
Is that right? Instant.
Makes me feel like I'd find my keys in the morning if I'd have a cup of this.
Folgers crystals. Start your day with the coffee rich enough to be served in America's finest restaurants.
This business may seem like easy work, but try doing this with minor arthritis pain. For years I took aspirin, but now there's Advil. My doctor got me to try Advil for my arthritis pain. You know, one Advil is as effective as 2 regular aspirin, and that's the kind of strength I like. Advil gives me hours of relief, yet it's gentler to my stomach than aspirin. Advil does wonders for my aching joints and for my green thumb. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
One long-distance company reaches more people, in more places, in more ways than any other. Which one? It has 3 famous initials, MCI.
How fast does Anbesol relieve toothache pain? Before you can say.
Anbesol.
Denture pain? Before you can say.
Anbesol.
Anbesol stops minor mouth pain on contact. Anbesol and maximum strength Anbesol.
Over the last 5 weeks in China, we have seen a student sit-in turn into a national mass movement for freedom and reform, and now into chaos with the threat of a civil war and possibly anarchy that could engulf 1 billion people. Unforgettable are the faces and voices of those who led the movement. The students, the idealists who dreamed of transforming their communist society, who believed that the truth of their ideals and the legions of their supporters could overcome all obstacles.
Why I should be afraid?
And you...
I'm just a common student.
A factory worker who joined the protest said, "These are our children. These are the people's children. If the government moves against them, we will risk our lives with them." At its height, the movement was so reasonable, so peaceful, and so widely supported. The government questioned the students' loyalty, but they swore allegiance to their country, saying all they wanted was reform. Their theme song was the Communist Internationale. At the same time, their dreams were of something beyond communism: freedom, democracy, human rights.
Lincoln said, the government is by the people, of the people, and for the people. Yeah, that's very right, I think, in China.
They believed that the power of the people would save them, would overcome the threat of force.
The government will not and cannot make that decision to crack down on the student movement.
Do you agree with that?
Because we have people behind us.
Tonight, no one knows how many of these students have disappeared into the maw of massacre, or how many will be blasted down in days to come. We don't know how many of these idealistic young people have been carried off, or how many more will be. We do know their voices will echo in history and in the heart. And that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from Los Angeles. When and if there are major developments on China, you will see and hear them on this station. I'll see you here tomorrow. Good night.
This is CBS. At Shell, we've been taking good care of cars for